Welcome to Closer to Truth. I'm speaking with neuroscientist Terrence Sejnowski, author of the vital, timely new book, ChatGPT and the Future of AI, The Deep Language Revolution. Terry, let's discuss the future of AI, superintelligence, consciousness, morality, ethics, dangers, all the good stuff, which are prime themes of your vital new book, ChatGPT and the Future of AI, The Deep Language Revolution. So let's start with superintelligence. What is superintelligence versus intelligence?
Well, superintelligence is basically science fiction. That is to say, and philosophers, of course, love talking about this. What would happen if we created a machine that was smarter than we were? And, how would we deal with that? It would be again, as I said, the alien would land on the Earth, and it wouldn't be just able to talk to us, but basically would be able to take over, and then perhaps even existential issues. Will it need us? Maybe it doesn't need us, and so that's a concern. And my friend Geoffrey Hinton is one of the people who is concerned, and he makes some very good points. He's really very, very thoughtful guy, and he said, "Look, right now we're writing programs. The AI are basically our creations." But if AI can program, which we know it can, maybe it can actually program itself to become smarter because it has all these resources. And if it does that, who knows? We would lose control. And furthermore, there's an arms race going on. There are bad actors out in the world, and what if they get ahead of us and their AI is better than our AI? How are we going to deal with that? So there's good reason to be concerned. But I think that in the short run, this is really extrapolating way beyond anything that we can be sure of. And there's a vast, again, disagreement among the experts on, whether or not this is a really an issue that is going to be, we should be perhaps regulating. And I'm glad that Jeff is worried about it. I'm glad someone's worried about it, because if we don't really put in guardrails to prevent this from happening, then if it starts happening, it's too late. So, but from my perspective, this is kind of like a opportunity that we have right now. We have this transition that's occurring in the world, this revolution, both in AI and neuroscience at the same time. And I think that it's so beautiful, and potential is so great that, the benefits far outweigh right now the risks. Now, in the future, that may change.
What are the next generations of large language models? Right now, what are the step functions that could occur in the near term and midterm?
Well, it's very difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. The great philosopher of the New York Yankees, Yogi Berra, said that. And I completely agree, is that we really often are not very good at imagining the future. There are unintended consequences. The founders of the internet thought that they were going to democratize. Everybody is going to have a voice. Well, we now see, the consequences of everybody having their own voice. Is that it's there's all sorts of very, very bad kind of viral stuff that's going on right now, right, between small echo chambers and so forth. But this is the early days that you have to regulate these new technologies. It's true of all technologies, by the way. They can be used for good and bad. You just have to find out what the failure modes are, and be able to able to prevent that without throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? And that's where we are.
The problem is with the dangers is what you said about bad actors, because in order for guardrails to work, everybody has to conform to it.
Right.
And if there are, and one need not name countries or rogue regimes or whatever, but they're pretty obvious. And there may be others that are subnational entities, which we see in the world today, which are very powerful, that are not national organizations that would have various incentives to create this. So are we dealing with a situation where there is an inevitable danger that is looming ahead of us?
It could well be. I think that's a long-term concern. It's not a short-term concern, and by short-term I mean a couple of decades. Let's look at nuclear weapons. Okay, nuclear energy, again, when it was first created, it really was it was an existential threat, right? I remember it growing up. I mean, this is like everybody was really concerned that
Sure.
nuclear war was going to break out, right? Oh my God! But eventually there were international agreements that were made that limiting the proliferation of nuclear weapons, and we've managed to survive. It's still the final word isn't in, but I think the same thing will happen. Another, actually even better example is when it was possible to manipulate genes. The recombinant DNA technology. There was a lot of concern that we're going to let loose viruses or something by creating them in the lab, and that's going to be existential. But the biologists themselves, they self-regulated. They got together at Silmar here in California, and what they did is they put in place a whole series of containment levels. In other words, you don't do the experiment on your bench. You do it in a facility where you're isolated from the world, the circulation of air and so forth. And then, at the highest level, you don't want anything to get out. I mean, everything has to stay in that room, or it's not going to get out. So that worked beautifully, and it is still in place today. And so, we were able to, I think, in large part, to survive because of the fact that people self-regulated.
But the level of investment for AI, if you leverage the current large language modules and then adapt it for malevolent purposes, would be orders of magnitude less than separating uranium with tens of thousands of centrifuges. So we're dealing with an order with a technology potentially which could be adapted with very modest investment by malevolent actors.
Well, that is certainly true. That now, all these startup internet companies have that power. You don't need to create the large language model to be able to use it and fine tune it. However, that having been said, I don't think that the current technology is even at all close to superintelligence or being able to, it's being used for fake news. Yeah, okay, that's true. But, that is really an annoyance more than it is, I think, a game stopper. Put it this way, I'm not an expert at this. In fact, it turns out, this is interesting, The Economist had an article and showed that if you ask experts about existential threats of AI, they're much, much more, concerned and also think that it's going to happen sooner than super forecasters. These are people who have had a track record of being able to predict what the future is going to be in nuclear energy and biowarfare and so forth. People. Who do you trust? I would have put the money on the super forecaster. By the way, the super forecasters also bet on Trump, right? You probably know this. And all these pollsters were just completely off the beam. They didn't understand what was happening.
Let's go to a more fun topic, a hot issue, AI consciousness, which actually underlies many of the profound questions about AI. So, Terry, what's your approach to AI consciousness?
Well, first of all, you have to appreciate that the word consciousness has many different meanings. It's not a scientific term. And it's very difficult. A lot of people, philosophers especially, have written books about this. But just like, other words like intelligence and understanding, it's a colloquial word that doesn't really have a sound foundational source in science. Now, that doesn't stop a scientist from trying to understand it. And let me give you an example. In the last century, there was this concept of vitalism. This is before DNA was discovered. And, what's the difference between a live cell and a rock, right? There's got to be something different because they have the live cells are vital. There's some kind of vital substance in them, right? That was the theory. Well, and what is life was a big question, just like what is consciousness? Well, DNA was discovered. We had a mechanism, and now the biology has really answered enormous, detailed questions about replication of cells, evolution. This is now, nobody asks that anymore. They don't question what is life. They now question the details. And consciousness has a similar character. We don't understand enough about the brain to know the mechanisms yet, but once we do, we'll have a much better way to study it and to understand it. We're not there yet.
Okay, so I would tease apart two things that you are saying. One is that consciousness is a weak term in terms of specification. Marvin Minsky classically called consciousness a suitcase term, which meant you can take whatever you want and throw into your suitcase, and that's consciousness. But there are philosophers distinguish between access consciousness, but the key element here is phenomenal consciousness, the fact that we have an inner experience, an inner movie, which is perhaps a poor analogy, but it's that sense of consciousness. So I think that's what we're talking about, which seems to be of a very different character, much different than the mechanical approach to the replication of life. The phenomenal nature of consciousness seems like it's a different character. May not be. Some people think there's an illusionism to it, but I think that's a critical element. Second question would be then, what is the mechanism behind that? And I think those are two separate questions to deal with. But that mechanism has to deal with the phenomenal nature of consciousness and whether AI could ever have that. And I think what you're saying is that assuming there is nothing outside of the brain, that ultimately there would be a way to explain that, even if we have no idea now.
So let me give you a little bit of background. So I'm here at the Salk Institute, and Francis Crick, who cracked, with Jim Watson, the structure of DNA, was interested in consciousness. And I remember he used to come for tea, and we had these discussions, and it was really wonderful. He gave, there's two things I remember in particular. He said, Terry, listen carefully to the questions that the philosophers ask, but ignore their answers. In a sense that they did the best they can, but it's without data, it's very difficult to answer questions like that. But he did something which was very interesting. He said, I don't want to work on, self-consciousness, which is, the part that most people are interested in. But if we could understand visual awareness, perception, and how that's done by neurons, it might give us a clue. And so a lot of progress was made there. And so I think that, that's how you work in science. You start with a simpler problem and you work your way up. And so we're in that process right now. And we have the tools now we can record from hundreds of thousands of neurons, or, the record right now is 1 million at the same time. And we can manipulate the neurons, not just record, but also turn them on and off. We're going to get there. It's just a matter of time. And we'll be able to do the equivalent of what I think Francis and Jim Watson did for biology, which is figure out the mechanisms. And I actually think that we're almost there, in the sense that we already have signals that we see that we don't understand, and they're called traveling waves. So if you can, we can look down with optical recording on the surface of the cortex, and what we see is not just a bunch of neurons randomly going on and off, but very orderly traveling waves that sweep across the cortex, back and forth, at many different frequency bands under different conditions. And this is an autonomous thing that's happening spontaneously, and as well as being stimulated by the outside. And we're studying that in my lab. We're trying to understand computationally what you could use these traveling waves for. And it's very exciting right now because it looks as if this supercharges the cortex, these traveling waves.
And would that have to do with the binding problem as well, with organizing all thoughts into a single
right,
one unified image?
I think that's where we're looking. These are global traveling waves. And by the way, we talked before about sleep. Well, one of the things that was discovered when we analyzed human cortex, this is in epilepsy patients who were in the hospital, and they had to put electrodes down on the surface of the cortex. What we discovered is that during sleep, these traveling waves occur that are circular. They circulate around the whole cortex globally, right? So this is, I think, a way to organize information throughout the cortex. And I think during the day, there's similar things happening, maybe on a smaller scale. But the idea, though, is that potentially these new mechanisms are going to be ones that will help unify all of the different sensory, motor, and thoughts. That all, I think, is occurring perhaps in different parts of the cortex, but it's all unified by these traveling waves.
It would seem to me that if this is indeed the case, where you can determine the nature of consciousness by this new and detailed analysis of the cerebral cortex, that it would be an in principle certainty that AI could, in principle, be conscious. There'd be no reason that could not be duplicated in some sense. Is that right?
What's happening right now in AI is absolutely breathtaking. In other words, the progress is being made. There are literally thousands, maybe tens of thousands of some of the brightest researchers, engineers, mathematicians, neuroscientists out there that are now really making progress toward this goal. And I think it's going to be possible to. And this again is the dialogue between AI and neuroscience. I think we're going to understand it first in the brain. I think we'll understand what the substrate of consciousness is. I'll use that word loosely. In the brain, and once we have that, it would just be a matter of short, mechanisms could be implemented in transformers that could take it to the next level, which would include all of those activities that then we see in the brain, but now in the transformer.
Could there be an effective ultimate test of AI consciousness? Of course, the test would not be just asking the AI, is it conscious? Because, of course, it would say yes. Ray Kurzweil famously said, if we don't believe them, they'll get mad at us. But that doesn't mean that they really have that internal awareness. Is there some test of that?
Well,
that's even conceivable.
This is a very problematic question. How do I know that you're conscious?
Yeah, it's a theory.
I mean, I can talk to you, and it sounds like you're conscious because but I only have access to my own, so I don't know
Sure.
whether you or AI or anything is conscious. I think we have to have a deeper mathematical understanding, and people talk about understandable AI, where we can explain things, not just get the right answer, but explain the answer. And I think that explanation is not going to come in the form of words, which is, of course, what humans use, but rather it's going to come through very, very sophisticated mathematical analysis of these high-dimensional spaces. And once we have that, we'll be able to really come up with detailed tests of whether the electrical activity in my brain or in transformers is similar, right? And we'll see.
Let's go to the next level beyond AI consciousness, and that is virtual immortality. The possibility that we read in the popular press of uploading our entire brain, not just our entire brain, but our first-person awareness to non-biological media so that our persona, the totality of what we are as self-conscious entities, can exist beyond the death of the body. This, to me, is dependent upon whether AI can be conscious as a first step. But this now second step involves an enormous amount of sophistication and data. Many people assume that virtual immortality is a certainty on the horizon. I'm not one of them in terms of at least the time frame. How do you look at this?
Well, it sounds again like science fiction, but I don't know of any reason why it's not impossible. So we have to wait and see. However, we're making progress, and I mentioned earlier that we were able to analyze all the activity in a fly brain, about 100,000 neurons. And we're able to download that into a network model. It was really a very highly sophisticated dynamical systems model that comes from physics that can replicate the behavior and the activity patterns in the fly. So in a sense, we've downloaded the brain of the fly into 100,000 neurons at least. So that's a proof of principle. But whether or not it's possible to do that for a human brain is a big jump, and because it's so much more complex than a fly brain. But I think that it's a matter of having the right computational resources, very, very hard, difficult problem with taking enough data. We need enough data. Where's that going to come from? But who knows where we're headed? And if anybody could have predicted, if anybody could have told me 30 years ago where we'd be today, I would say that science fiction.
Yep.
So language translation. You remember Star Trek, the Universal Language Translator, right? I thought it was science fiction, but now for all practical purposes, we have it in our pocket, right? This is amazing.
The difference between downloading the fly brain of 100,000 neurons and seeing it behaviorally work in the simulation on the computer is not immediately the same thing as that experience of the fly doing the same thing. Are you making an unspecified, unstated assumption that once you have the simulation of these 100,000 neurons doing everything they're doing, that there's an experience associated with that pattern? And the analogy used is when you can simulate a rainstorm on a computer perfectly, the computer doesn't get wet.
Well, this is a little bit different than a simulation. And what do I mean by that? This is a generative model. In other words, just like ChatGPT, this is able to, once it's been downloaded, it can now produce new patterns, new behaviors, and by the way, this is amazing. It actually, we trained it on a very small, 10-minute segment, and then compared it to what happens later. And some of the patterns that it came up with, the downloaded model, were able to predict the other behaviors in the fly that weren't trained. It wasn't trained to do things, but it was able to do things that were different. And so that again is something that would be, a good test if you have you've downloaded someone's mind, and now you can not just talk to them, but actually lead them in new directions. That would be amazing.
You like the analogy of treating large language modules as if you were treating children, and you make in your book, ChatGPT and the Future of AI, you make the point that if we pamper LLMs, they may become like spoiled brats. So in that analogy, what follows from that?
So the children are constantly given feedback, by the parents, by their friends, by the school. I mean, and this is called reinforcement learning, and it's an important part of growing up. Now, none of that is done with these large language models. They're just fed a lot of data and they're just let to go on their own, right? But now actually AIs they're beginning. There's a couple of efforts to start integrating reinforcement learning at the very earliest stages, so that it's by the time it comes out, at the end, it's already aligned with the culture and the values and the ethics that we have. So that I think is going to have. I think that's going to be a solved problem. I don't see that that's insurmountable.
What rights might future AI have? Could it be that pulling the plug, turning off the electricity, could be considered an immoral act?
Wow. Okay. This is way above my pay grade. I'm not an ethicist. I don't know. I mean, suppose that it had as much sentience as a dog. Now, people who own dogs tell me, I don't, that they have personalities. They have
Sure.
they can communicate with humans, and they have emotions and so forth. And so even if we had an AI that was at that level, I think it would already be problematic. I mean, about how you treat it and so forth. So I don't know. I don't know where we're heading, but it's going to be interesting.
Terry, this has been great. What I'd like to do now is do a final section on some very short questions. This is not terribly serious. Nobody's going to hold you to this, but it's a gut feeling of how you feel about things. So I'm going to ask you some questions, scales of 1 to 10, just whatever number comes into your mind. So the first 3 questions are on existential risk of AI. And I'm being very precise in each question. So first, on a scale of 1 to 10, will AI ever have the capability to cause existential risk to humanity? 1 to 10.
Well, the probability is somewhere between 0 and 1, and I'll just say 5.
Okay. On a scale of 1 to 10, the same. Will AI actually cause existential risk to humanity?
I would say close to 0. I actually think that, if we create it, we should be able to control it. But, I have colleagues that have the opposite view.
Okay. And then the next question takes that just the final step, which I think you've sort of answered perhaps, but on a scale of 1 to 10, will AI in fact destroy humanity? And you would be close to 0 on that. Others would
not. I would say negative 10.
Okay.
Okay.
Right, so now on consciousness, similar kinds of questions. On a scale of 1 to 10, will AI ever become conscious in the sense of having a felt inner experience, whether the experience is of a bat, as Thomas Nagel famously said, or of a fly, or of a human?
Well, 2 numbers. One, I think it's probably close to 8 of whether they will, and close to 2 of whether we'll ever know it.
Ah, okay. You say 8. That's interesting. Why wouldn't you say 10? What would be the barrier based on everything you know in neuroscience and AI?
Okay, here's the insight, which is that we already live with a lot of creatures out there that are conscious. They're not human. They don't have human consciousness, but they have their own niche. They have conscious awareness of what's going on around them. I think it's pretty clear, again, with pet owners know this. And so the AI will always be AI consciousness. It's not going to be human. It's not going to be, a dog. It's going to be different. And so, but it'll be similar.
Okay. On a scale of 1 to 10, given unlimited time, is uploading our first-person consciousness to attain virtual immortality in principle possible?
Yes.
So, yes, meaning a 10?
Maybe 9, between 9 and 10. Yeah.
Okay. On a scale of 1 to 10, given unlimited time, will uploading our first-person consciousness be, in fact, practical?
It depends on your resources. If you're a billionaire, then it's 10, and if not, it's 0.
Okay, and another inequity in society.
Right.
Terry, this has been terrific. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I love the book. It's a very important book. I recommend it to everyone. ChatGPT and the Future of AI, the Deep Language Revolution. Viewers can watch over 1,000 videos and TV episodes on consciousness on the Closer to Truth website and Closer to Truth YouTube channel. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like and comment below. You can support Closer to Truth by subscribing. Closer to Truth is now accepting your tax-exempt donations. Please come to closertotruth.com/donate. Thank you very much for supporting us, and thanks for watching.